I feel like that a lot of us, because of the desensitizing of politics in our realm, tend to forget that fashion has always been very political, and fashion will forever be political because that's just the way fashion is. Hello, beautiful people. Welcome if you're new. Welcome back if you're revenant. Please consider subscribing if you like everything and anything about fashion, critical thinking, and yapping. For today's video, I want to talk about how fashion and politics are very intertwined, the Western hypocrisy around what is to be politicized and what is not to be politicized, especially within the fashion realm, and also the problem with the whole desensitizing of politics, especially among millennials and Gen Z. I would even say that Gen X were very desensitized around that, and why actually nothing can be depoliticized in a world that is overly politicized when everything is super politicized, and every bit of our lives are, led by laws and regulations that all comes from politics. And yeah, this all stems from a picture that I've seen, pictures and videos that I've seen of Anna Wintour. She's not the creative director. She's the editor in chief of American Vogue. She's been in this position for way too long at this point. And she was at the SS Daily fashion show in London. SS Daily is a British designer, and she was wearing a scarf adorned by the American flag, and it was said, I could read on one side that it said Harris on it. And then it made me think about how, these very subtle elements have been very prevalent within the fashion sphere. And also, I talked about a few videos ago, the like flag fashion, patriotism fashion and all that, and how it's coming back in full force. Fashion and politics have always been very intertwined. And I don't think that I need to do like a whole historic background of how it is so. Well, I think that a lot of us have studied the Middle Ages, feudalism, and the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire. And there was always like a section in the studies where we would learn about how like the clothing were very codified, meaning that depending on which social class and the gender, there was some fabrics, some clothing that you could or could not wear, because clothing was the way that would actually show like which class or which group you were part of. And it was a very important factor for people to kind of be distinguished this easily. And I would say that here I'm mostly talking about the Western world, because I grew up in the West and I'm a Westerner as well. And that's literally the history that I have learned. But as someone who is also, like you can see, a Black woman and has some African heritage, Congolese to be precise, clothing also back then in, the African continent also had meanings and stuff, but it was different. I would one day talk about it because I think it's very important to understand how the West and the global South all have like different vision of society, in the way that the global South ways of seeing society was less compartmentalized, in different section, where you had to make sure that you were completely distinguishing yourself from certain group, mainly like, the wealthy had to be different from the peasant. It was not really like that. But here I'm just going to focus on the Western world because that's the history that I know best. But already back then, different clothing, different materials were reserved to very specific groups. There's something that has always made me so kind of baffled to know that during the Middle Ages, for example, actually a lot of the people in kingdoms didn't really know what the king looked like. A lot of people had like no idea. They knew they had a king, but they didn't know what it looked like. But still, so for the king to be easily recognized when he would be like out and about, he was the only one who was allowed to wear silk. And also there was like specific colors that he could only wear. So when he was out and about and among like the people, among the peasants, among the people of lower grades, he would be easily recognized because people knew about those fashion rules and they knew that only the king could wear a very specific material, a very specific color. So it was mainly for that, but also because silk was and still is a very expensive material. I think we all know that, silk is hella expensive. That's also why we have like some alternatives to it. That fake silk is called rayon, and it's made of synthetic fabrics, and it's also named, I think, bamboo silk or something like that. But it looks like silk, but it's not silk. It's way cheaper than silk because, silk is a natural fiber and it's really expensive and it's really, like the way you work silk, you have to be really skilled for that. So basically, during the Middle Ages, it was about that, and I remember being like very, very impressed and kind of in awe because I thought that, since I grew up in a era where pictures were everywhere and we could see paintings and stuff like that, that everyone during the Middle Ages knew what the king looked like, and it's actually not the case. Very few people really knew, but majority of them didn't. So the dress codes were a way to make sure that if the king would go out, he would be easily recognized, even though the king was not actually wandering like among the peasant that easily. But still, it's very important to kind of know that already back then there were literally laws that people had to follow, in order to make sure that we would easily see where they come from. Where they come from by like which social class they're part of, or also maybe which, I would say which maybe country they might come from as well, because or region, because depending on the region or the country, it would be like completely different. Even though back then the like sense of countryness was not similar to the one that we have today, because in the Middle Ages, especially the early Middle Ages, ethno states was not really a very popular phenomenon or concept for a lot of people. Like borders have changed. Like the borders that we have of Europe today, they date back from the 19th century. So it's been like 200 years that we have like the current borders. And I'm not gonna really go deeper onto the whole concept of borders and how ridiculous those are, because borders are actually an invention of the human mind. They don't exist in real life. So even that, like, the concept of ethno state is completely dumb. But That's a discussion for my Substack that you can go and follow if you want to. Anyways, so fashion in that way, the fact that it was ruled to really specific criterias and to specific people to follow, like said rules, it has always very much been political, and it still is today. I feel like that, for example, when you look at the luxury fashion and fast fashion today, um, there's still like this marker of social class, because if you can afford luxury fashion, it means that you come from a high social class that is allowing you to afford like thousands of dollars pieces of clothing, which also, by the way, does not necessarily mean that it was made fairly or ethically, but we will talk about it in another video as well. Um, but it's just that fashion and politics have a very strong meaning, and have always been, because the way you dress is a way that is like the first thing that people are seeing about yourself, and that can actually give some cues about who you are and where you come from and which social class you are. And just in general, like the way public people, especially like in the government, in politics, are also presented, is very calculated as well. Like, they do have stylists, they do have, like, there's a very specific way that people in higher position have to present themselves in order to be taken seriously. I think that the first thing that I think about is, like, for example, the workplace. Like, depending on which sector you work in, people are not gonna be presenting themselves the same way. Like, for example, if you work in the government or in finance or in law, I think people expect you to be dressed a certain way. Whereas when you work in a more creative field, people also expect you to be dressed a certain way. And I think that maybe the kind of law of fashion are less rigorous when you work in a creative field, because people expect you to be like also creative in the way that you dress. Whereas when something is seen as very serious, which also, when you think about it, like, what is serious, what is not serious, is also a very arbitrary concept, because who's to tell that finance is a more serious job than, a creative field, when both of those fields are very important. Like, I mean, the system is always going to put like more emphasis on something that is more beneficial to, the few, which is the ruling class. When it comes to benefiting the majority, suddenly it's less important. As someone who works for the culture, and I am in the cultural field, I work like in entertainment, more like theater and, music and live representations. The way I do dress, like, my style is not really changing, because I feel like that it really reflects the field I am in, and people kind of expect me to be dressed like that. And if you look around, like, majority of the people that work in that field also, in a way, more unconventional in the way they dress. Guys, slight precision, because yes, I do work in culture, but it's important to know that the reason why my very chaotic style is not a problem in my workplace is because I work in the alternative scene. So it is expected that when you are in the alternative scene, since it's not the known prestigious, branch of the cultural field, that my style is kind of reflecting of my job and the field that I am in. That yes, I work in culture, but I work in the alternative scene. But again, all that to say that like even the expectations and the invisible rules that there is around how you have to dress in depending on which field or sector you work in is also very political, which then leads me to the whole Anna Wintour SS Daily Harris scarf. So was it like a week or 2 weeks ago? I don't remember. During the London Fashion Week, during the SS Daily fashion show, Hannah Winter was seen wearing a scarf with the American flag and Harris written on it. And if you are, you know, aware of what's happening in the world, you know that in the United States, this is an election year, meaning that the stakes are very high, especially when you know that the United States is an imperial power and has literally every time something happens in the United States, you know for sure we will know about it. That's how imperialistic this country is every time something happens there, we are very much aware of what's happening around like in the few hours. And so I was seeing that and then it kind of reminded me of how Vogue a few months ago hired Jack Schlossberg, who is the grandson of John F. Kennedy and the son of Caroline Kennedy, who was a US ambassador, to be the political correspondent for Vogue, knowing it's a very election year. And I was, checking about like the whole Vogue page, website page, and I've seen that they have like articles on the Roe v. Wade and all that. And as I was, looking through those articles and then thinking about, Jack Schlossberg and Anna Wintour and her scarf, that's when I kind of told myself about how Vogue has a very, very specific target that they're aiming at, which is influencing its readers and watchers to vote Democrat, and they are not like shying away from it. When you take a look at Jack Schlossberg content, like the man went to the DNC, he's been talking about the Democrats a lot, and the way also that he comes about with it is very, you can see that Vogue is trying to reach its younger audience, like mainly Gen Z and millennials, because not only they hired Jack for his charisma, but because a lot of people, especially women, knowing that Vogue is like mainly women, find him attractive. So this move is a very calculated move also from Vogue, because at least they know that, they can easily influence their audience into voting Democrats. Then it's also Vogue and all those kind of fashion, really big fashion institutions tend to be like overtly liberal. So of course that if you are a liberal outlet, you're not going to vote for Republican, even though liberal, Republican, like the difference is the difference are really, really closing down. It's starting to really to be blurred out a lot. And I was seeing that and I was like, also thinking about how during the Russian invasion of Ukraine, like the liberal fashion world was very, very open about their support of Ukraine, and so many Ukrainian artists and like fashion designers were put forward. There were like many articles. There was even like, was it a Vogue article of Zelensky's wife during the war, and a very tasteless, spread of her posing next to, was it like a fire jet or something like that? Like something that was kind of wild. That was wild. And I know that was one of those big, I think that was Vogue. I'm not sure, but I think it might be like Vogue, Harper Bazaar, or Marie Claire, or one of those, but I think it was Vogue. So, there would be like a lot of spreads on the matter and all that jazz. And as we are going through um, a genocide, the liberal fashion world has been very, very, very silent about the whole genocide happening to the Palestinian. And so the hypocrisy of the whole situation is not lost on me, um, because I think it's just so insane to me about how we all know fashion is political in many, many ways. The examples that I gave are just like a very tiny bit of the iceberg, but the politics of fashion is kind of like immense. There's many, many things to say about the politics of fashion, because the whole fashion world is political. The fact that there was some time where people were advocating for more size inclusivity, and the fact that then when we had this body positive movement, suddenly it died down, and then runaways starting to see less and less body diversity on the runway. Like, fashion is political and has always been. I am wearing here a kufia, and I've actually explained its meaning in my fashion literacy video about how this is also a political statement, and you have like also t-shirt that you can buy in fast fashion with political statement, with a feminist statement and all that. I mean, feminist a political statement, of course, but it's just that I am seeing, like big outlets such as Vogue doing this very, in a way, like subtle but not so subtle political stances on who they want their readership to vote for and who they should vote for. But then on other issues, they're going to be completely silent, And it's just that for me, you cannot claim to care about one side of the planet and not the other. Because especially that the one side of the planet you claim to care about is the side that is wreaking havoc the other side that you're not caring. Meaning that you cannot claim to care for American politics, but not foreign politics, when American politics are wreaking havoc foreign politics for their own benefit. I think at this point, it's becoming clearer and clearer that that's the case. And it's just that fashion has always been very picky and choosy. I gave this example about like the Russian invasion of Ukraine and how you could not actually, escape the the support, because I also remember it was in fashion retailers and non-fashion retailers where you were paying, you could also you were asked if you would love to give like some donate some more money, and it would go for Ukraine and all that jazz. And even some fashion outlets had like pop-up pages on their support, on places you could donate. And so they did that for Ukraine, but they are completely silent on Palestine and Lebanon and the whole Middle East and Sudan and Congo, you know? And it's moment like that when you kind of start to see the real face of liberalism, and to kind of understand that liberalism not as is not the political party or political ideology it claims to be. You know, it claims to be like a political ideology that is tolerant, that is kinder, that is better. But like I said, the gap between liberalism and right wing are closing down. Every freaking day, it's closing down. Especially if you do pay attention to the discourse of Kamala Harris when she's talking about a lethal army, the most lethal army of the planet, as if the American army is not already lethal, talking about a border wall. Suddenly, the whole page about, you know, against the capital punishment is gone. Plans to fund even more police, to keep funding cop cities. Like, the more you pay attention to what liberalism is, and here I'm talking about the United States, because the United States has like the most influence and is actually the father of liberalism and neoliberalism that we're living right now, and is influencing the rest of the West, like here in Western Europe. But it just, yeah, like you're seeing like as we gain more and more fascistic, which liberalism has actually allowed to happen, because liberalism is not a left wing party. Liberalism is right wing. It's not just to the extreme of right wing, but it slides to the extreme when it needs to. Look at France and literally the coup that Macron has done by electing a prime minister that literally had the least votes, because he did not want to elect a left-wing government, you know. And but there, nobody is saying like, I haven't heard any of the Western countries say a peep about that government coup. That would have been like a country from the global south. Suddenly, like the West would have, would be like condemning left and right the coup. But when it's one of their liberal friends doing that, nothing. Like, we're not going to condemn the fact that the people voted for one party, but Macron decided that he would not allow this party and not use democracy to elect a prime minister from the party that the majority of the people chose. Liberalism is not left wing, and it just pretended to be left wing for a very long time. And I think it's something that ever since the genocide of the Palestinians have exacerbated and intensified in the past almost year, a lot of the fashion world has shown their true faces, which is the true face of liberalism, because liberalism has actually shown its very, very real colors. And all the institutions that do falls into that political ideology have also shown their true colors. And that's also why it's becoming more apparent and more obvious when they using that political party to push an agenda, which is the case. I mean, Vogue is clearly pushing for an agenda, with, the Harris scarf that Anna Wintour was wearing, the hiring of Jack Schlossberg. And it's just that it's not a new thing. It has been happening for a long time. It's just that it's been happening more overtly, and it's more obvious now that those entities are overtly picking and choosing what they want to politicized, when you can't depoliticize life in general, and especially a field such as fashion that has always been political. On the whole desensitizing of politics within millennials and Gen Z, there's something that I have actually realized is that, first of all, critical thinking is gone. We lacking critical thinking big time, which is very, very, very scary to me, because people don't think anymore, you know? And it's because I think that, since we were desensitized, since we were kids, about really caring about politics and our environment, and what those politics and legislations and rules impact our lives, we just kind of tossed it around. We just kind of pretending that the thing that we are being told should be politicized is the only thing that we're gonna consider. But outside of that, we kind of act completely oblivious of the impact that politics has on our daily lives, because politics is literally there every time and every day. And I just remember when I was younger and I would ask my parents about some political thing, I feel like that many of us have heard the whole phrase of, oh, you'll understand when you older. And for me, it's just such a dangerous way of behaving. Like, I'd rather have adults be like, okay, I don't understand either what's really happening, rather than telling me that I should not care about a system that I live under and that is going to impact me and that is still impacting me even though I am a child. And I think this whole way of seeing politics as a adults only thing to care about not only stems from the whole Western culture that views kids as less than. They don't like Western culture does not view kids as full human beings. They don't they do when it's convenient to it, and they can politicize the bodies of those children, but they don't when it comes to actually enlightening those children about a system that they live under. And it's been really kind of sad to witness the way so many people around my age and younger just don't really care about politics outside of, when they are told to care about politics, meaning that when they are told to vote, and that's just about it. And by doing so, I'm not saying that you should talk about politics 24/7. I don't talk about politics 24/7. But what I am saying is to at least have some understanding that every bit of your life, every single second of your life is politicized, because politics is literally part of our daily life. And your duty to vote as a citizen once every few years is, first of all, not democracy. It's not full democracy because a lot of things happens in life, and it's just that majority of the decisions are not being taken with our consent, or even we are not even asked to really have a say on that. And it's just that I beg guys to truly understand that everything is political. Literally everything. The fact that we have to walk on the pavement and not on the road is political. The fact that you have to stop at the red light is political. The fact that the shop you go to, grocery shop in, is opening and closing and set in a certain way is political. The fact that you have to go to the till to pay and you cannot just walk out of the shop is political, because there was at a time someone and or some people who decided to legislate the way we're going to live. The fact that you live in a flat and then you have to pay rent is political. You know, every bit of our life is political. You cannot depoliticize things when it's convenient to you. I know the West does it, and that's the very hypocritical way of the West dealing with politics, because it's just not doable. It's just not possible. You cannot, for the life of me, decide that this is political, but this won't be political, because everything is political. Me talking to you here is political, and it's just that I want more people to be aware of that, more people to kind of understand, especially if you have an interest in fashion. If you have an interest in fashion like me, I think that, which is also very kind of contradictory, because the fashion history, the political history of fashion is well documented. It's always talked about. Every time there's a big movement, the fashion world is going to be there. But then suddenly there's a complete amnesia where nobody remembers that actually fashion is political. But then people are going to remember fashion is political when it is convenient to them. The whole concept of some fashion movement who were actually political movement and who became fashion movement, and the whole political side, the very heavy political side, have been toned down. Like, I think about the punks, for example. I talk about the punks a lot because I literally have a book about punk fashion, and I've studied punk fashion. And I think I'm going to make a video on punk fashion as well, because it's a very interesting history. I've talked a little bit about it, but like, politically speaking, the punks were really um heavy on expressing their discontent and making a statement, and also being very unconventional. um and so, like, I feel that when you talk about the punk fashion, you always have to talk about the whole political history behind it, where it stems from, why, how come, what it means, because every element that the punks were wearing was a statement. It was a political statement. And even though it has been toned down, I think that it's still, you cannot think about punks without thinking about like how dissident they are and they were, even though they are less now, because again, the whole political side has been toned down to just be seen as an aesthetic. But it's still like, you cannot remove the political in the punk history. For me, it's something that is very kind of sad when I see that critical thinking is lacking, and people don't really understand the stakes that politics takes in our everyday life. And it's not just like every time there's a big election that politics are suddenly an important thing, but also in a way that people just can't discern that criticizing like a party doing bad does not mean that you are endorsing the other party doing bad. And I'm talking about the whole chaperone situation, where, because Girl is said rightfully so that both parties, Democrats and Republicans, are bad parties, and the queer community on Twitter went completely berserk, where they just could not fathom the idea that a queer woman would dare to not lick the boot of the Democrats.
I'm a Yankee Doodle Dandy, Yankee Doodle die. A real life nephew of my Uncle Sam, born on 4th of July.
When basically, like, the candidates that the Democrats have is a woman who wants a lethal army, who is still pledging her support to a genocidal entity, who hasn't said a shit when Haitian were being literally programmed and insulted or whatever. Hasn't said a thing where Americans were literally being killed by the genocidal army that they support, who wants like a border wall, who wants to fund more police. Like, there's so many things that you can, who's being literally endorsed by war criminals. But Chaperone saying that this is also bad made people believe that she was endorsing the Republicans, that they could not fathom the idea that a queer woman would not say nice thing to the Democrats. It's just such an insane thing. When you're just like, no, I'm sorry, if you cannot actually discern like criticism and factual criticism, and the fact that, like, pointing the fingers at the current government, American government, that is abating and actually doing a genocide in Palestine and now Lebanon, because all they care about is the oil and the money they can make. You just dumb. I'm very sorry. If you cannot actually understand that genuine criticism and genuinely saying, no, those both parties are actually bad, they're not here to help us. The Biden administration had 4 years to codify Roe v. Wade, something that they promised to do. And, that was one of the big statements of their campaign 4 years ago, and they have not. And what we left with? We left with women dying because they could not access safe abortions. So, being desensitized in politics is not a good thing. And especially when you have an interest in fashion, politics is literally intertwined, inherent to fashion. And I feel that most of my talks and my yappings do show it. That's also why I love to call them yaponomics, because it does show how fashion and politics are literally one, because everything is political. And I'm literally so serious when I say everything is political. And I hope more people are going to start understanding it, start having more critical thinking, and instead of dogpiling someone who rightfully so says that neither of the parties that the United States has is going to save them, start organizing. Start finding a community. Let's not forget that Khalifa Marsilius Williams, an innocent black man who was proved innocent, was still lynched by the Missouri state. And he could have been saved if the Supreme Court or even Biden would have said something, but they have not uttered a word. But Anna Wintour still wants you to vote for a woman who wants a lethal army. Passion is political, baby, and it will forever be. Okay, people, so that is it for me. I hope you enjoyed the rant. Please let me know in the comments what are your thoughts on the matter. I always love reading your thoughts when it comes to those subject. I missed you. I missed not posting, but it's just that work is a little bit hectic. But I'm very glad to be back and to post this new rant talk economics of mine. And if you liked this video, please give me a thumbs up. This helps me a lot. Share it around. The more the merrier, to the more people you share, to the more people will maybe start questioning their desensitization to politics and why it's bad, and to kind of understand that politics is inherent to our daily lives. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't. Please do. And you can also follow me on Substack, by the way. I do post on Substack. Like it's also long forms. It's, articles on, it's not fashion related, it's more everything political related. So if you want to read my thoughts on things, and maybe me kind of deepening on some subject, go follow me on Substack. Everything will be in the description below. So don't forget to check it as well, because I always put the articles that I am showing in my videos. And in the meantime, I'll see you in my next video. Love always.